Okay, so first I wanted just to welcome everyone back to the presentation. I don't know if there's anyone on today who wasn't able to join us last week on Thursday, but if this is new to you, welcome, and we'll have just very brief instructor bios in just a moment. But I wanted to start out with, talking about the overall goal of this entire series. We certainly want to make sure that you feel empowered, that you're part of, a group that is working to put more ownership and control of real estate out in the market, whether that's affordable, commercial, market, whatever that might be. But that this session is going to help you, or these collection of sessions, I should say, to really have a better understanding about that asset management piece and how things come together. We want you to better understand what an owner needs to know and what decisions need to be made in order to properly manage an asset, and sort of that role of the asset manager in getting in at a certain point and being part of that entire process. So, you want to be able to identify, the asset management responsibilities, when they start, what they are, the value from beginning to end. So again, that's the life cycle of the project, and distinguishing again between the role of an asset manager and a property manager. So we talked on the last session about, property management being more short-term in terms of goals and the day-to-day activity, and asset management, while not ignoring those day-to-day activities, really having that broader perspective and making sure that the owner is being well represented, that the goals that the owner has for the property, the expectations of a lender or another funding source that might exist, that all of those needs are being met from a communication and reporting perspective as well. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about budgeting and financial reports. And certainly, we all know that those types of reports really help to, define how a property is operating, and adjustments can be made from there. So we'll go to the next slide, which again is just sort of an introduction / reintroduction. Katisha, would you like to just give a very brief update on yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. My name's Katisha. Good morning, everyone. I am the founder and managing director of Urban Black. We are a Black-led, mission-based real estate development firm here in Seattle, Washington. Have projects all over the city and neighboring cities as well. We have been growing our property management and asset management department for the last 4 years or so. Most of my asset and property management experience comes from my work at the Pike Place Market, where I oversaw the 9 acres and 11 mixed-use historic properties that make up the market. And now we are in the city assisting community-based organizations and private property owners with managing and stewarding and developing their assets. So glad to be here. This is my second year back with the organization, and to see Carolyn and Kristen again. So happy to be here.
Okay. Okay. And then again, I'm Carolyn Zielinski. I'm the Director of Asset Management for Grow America, which was formerly National Development Council. We just are undergoing a rebranding, but our core organization remains, exactly the same. In my current role, I oversee a team of 5 asset managers. We have projects all over the United States. Formerly, I was in a similar position with KeyBank, also a very wide footprint, and managed 5 to 6 folks. But I've been in real estate development / property management / asset management for more years than I'd like to remember, but just had a great opportunity to work both in the LIHTC field, on the finance side, as well as working for private developers, and now, of course, back into this mission-based role of providing affordable housing. Next slide.
So I'm Kristen Ryan. I have my own women-led real estate development and advisory firm called Barrientos Ryan. We do work predominantly in the city of Seattle, working on a mix of affordable and workforce housing projects and civic development, which I put into so nonprofit organizations, workforce development, healthcare, education. I have at this point, it's a 25-year history in the real estate industry. I started in asset management, and I've run a property management firm and done investment advisory and done development. So I've seen a whole host of the scope of the various roles, and look forward to continuing the time with Katisha and Carolyn and the group of you today to provide as much assistance and tools and help as we can in your own journeys in the real estate industry. And again, I think Carolyn shared this, but please feel free to, interrupt, stop. This is not just let us talk at you. And so please make sure to, raise a hand, unmute yourself and say, hey, can we talk about that a little more? Ask questions as we go along. We want this to really be, we've got a small enough group that we can really customize this to be as informative as possible for you all. So
absolutely. Thanks, Kristen. And Katisha is going to get us started this morning. We'll move to the next slide and sort of recap the topics that we're going to be covering today.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Carolyn. So this is day 2. We had our first day on Thursday of last week. So today we're going to cover kind of the next section of topics in this 3-hour session. And I think day 3, we're going to go more into case studies. But for today, we're going to just go over an overview of what asset management is and the difference between asset management and property management. We did dive into pretty much a good depth of the differences in day 1. So if you, I'm sorry, I'm confusing myself. Yes, we did do that on day 1. Day 2. So I'm going to kick this off with leasing and marketing. It's actually one of my favorite aspects in property management. I think it's positive and it has like a development feel to it. Then we'll go over some staffing considerations for how you want to staff a asset that you might be taking over, go into operations as well as financial management, and then we'll talk property disposition, which is about when to sell a property or not to sell it. And then we also have a guest speaker today named Paula Liu. Am I saying her name right?
That's
I hope
correct.
so.
Yes,
okay.
She's with Grow America.
Grow America. And Paula, Caroline, do you want to talk a little bit about Paula's background? Because I don't think I'm going to do it justice.
Oh, sure. And she's going to introduce herself when she joins us in a bit here. But Paula has a background of being I'm sorry, my video was off, a property manager as well as an asset manager. So she works for a part of Grow America, which is known as P3. So she's going to talk about that a little bit. So, and she's based in Seattle, so a lot of local experience. But we had a great time, talking with her when we had our presentation, a couple of years ago. So I know that's going to be something exciting for us to look forward to.
Okay, great. Thanks, Carolyn. So essentially today is going to be a deeper dive of the topics that we started to talk about on day 1. So if you were not here on day 1, I encourage you to retrieve the recording or information and materials that may have been provided by Grow America, so you could have that information because that would also help inform the topics that we're going to cover today. Should I talk a little bit about day 3? Again, day 3 on a couple days, it's going to be on Thursday. We're going to dive into more case studies. I like case studies a whole lot because it provides a real life example of the information that, we're talking about and discussing. And then it just gives a visual an explanation of all of the terms, the language that we're using, the considerations. It's just helpful. So I encourage you to also attend the day 3 session. And there we're also going to talk more into outsourcing, which is a consideration that I think a lot of community-based organizations are making now if they, want to outsource the function of asset management or property management to a company that actually provides those services, or if they want to do in-house property management. I think that's always a helpful discussion, as well as additional financial topics from an asset management perspective. And Then also, a fun topic to cover is, problem solving very common issues within the property management world. Those are always fun to hear about, because I feel like, just in my experience, a lot of it has to do with problem solving, putting out fires, responding to 11th hour issues, all those types of things. So those are always colorful. And then I think we're also going to go into more deep dive into some financial analysis and case studies with Caroline on day 3. So for now, I will go ahead and kick off the next section, which is leasing and marketing. I think we have another question in the chat. Let me see if we go. Are we also able to request a copy of yesterday's course? I believe we can do that, yes. So if you want to send a message to tech directly, or whatever that process looks like, I think that they can get you that information for day 1. Okay, so leasing. I actually, when I first started in my real estate career almost 20 years ago, about 20 years now, I started actually doing a lot of leasing and advertising for properties that the small real estate company that I worked for was selling. And so I still use a lot of those skills in leasing today. So I'm very thankful that, that's kind of how I started in sales and leasing. So this is, again, one of my favorite aspects. So depending on what asset you're trying to lease, or I would also say leasing, but then also sales too. You want to develop a marketing plan, which is basically a plan to market the property. And when you're developing one, I actually have a example that I'm a reference. So if I look away from the camera, just know that that's what I'm looking at. You want to understand what type of asset you are looking to market, or what you have and how you're looking to market it, but then also taking a lot of thought into who would be your prospective renter for this particular asset. So for example, we have multiple different asset types. We have office, commercial office properties, vacant land, we have multifamily, we have retail. And depending on what type of asset you are marketing, you are going to probably put some serious consideration into who your target resident is. So for simplicity purposes and time, let's just I'll talk about one of the projects that we're marketing now, actually, because that's where my head is wrapped around. We have a 10-unit cooperative co-housing project that we actually just started construction on in April, called Corvidae in the Rainier Valley area. And it's a cooperative model, so it's a little different in terms of kind of maybe what we're seeing here, but it's kind of like a condominium. And based on the price points that we're selling the homes for, you have to be able to qualify at a certain income amount. And so when you look at a demographic for a particular asset, you're thinking about who would qualify to be a renter and or buyer for your asset, based on what your rent is going to be, based on what you're selling the home as. And that'll make it more clear on maybe who you should target to. So our target resident in this particular project seems to be, we're attracting a lot of teachers, some university professors, architects, engineers, let's see who else, some hospital administrators, based on kind of the demographic that we identified that seem to be attracted to this particular type of project. And so when we kind of got an idea of a profile of a target resident, then we're asking ourselves, okay, where do we find those people? And then how do we reach them? And then what message are we conveying to them to market the project? So what we did in our marketing plan for this particular project is we identified all the various ways we could market the project. And so we considered everything from advertisements in kind of local real estate periodicals or platforms like realtor.com. People might be familiar with that, or I think what we're finding most effective now, because it used to have those handheld kind of pamphlets, written pamphlets, which are kind of getting obsolete. And so we're doing a lot of online marketing, in Facebook Marketplace has become a big one, as well as Craigslist. We're putting it on the Northwest Multiple Listing Service. Anywhere where there seems to be people that are gravitating towards certain platforms to look for homes or apartments or whatever it is you're marketing. One of the other, we talked a little bit about affirmative marketing in day one. This particular project is an affirmative marketing, has a affirmative marketing component to it. So we're really trying to make sure the information gets out to underserved communities of color, for the opportunity, because it's a affordable home ownership project. And us being partners in the Black Home Initiative, we're just wanting to make sure that we get the information out to communities of color so they know about the opportunity. So what we're also did over the summer was, this is kind of where creativity comes in. We were hosting pop-up informational sessions at the station coffee house twice a month, to do meet and greets, and people that frequent the station come in, they'll see our poster boards up, and they'll come and talk to us about the project and get information and ask whatever questions they may have. And then we're also doing information sessions once every month too, to kind of go into depth about the pre-qualification. So that's an example of how we're intentionally targeting a market, or a demographic that we want to make sure they get the information to. So that's maybe not standard in a marketing plan, just a conventional one, but when you're thinking about who your target resident is and where they're at and where they frequent, you want to make sure that you advertise the project in that space. So we put out flyers, again, info sessions, meet and greets. We did do a lot of events this summer. So we were at a lot of community events with our poster boards, handing out flyers, talking to people. We had a real grassroots approach to marketing this particular type of product. But again, this was what this project required in my mind. And so we customize our marketing plan to do that. And again, if you have a different type of asset, it might look different. But this is just something that we did for this particular type of project. The other thing that yeah.
And I just sort of wanted to jump in. I think it is not as unusual anymore. I think one of the trends that, as we've gone from what Katisha was talking about, right, handouts, which you were using in neighborhoods around projects that came into bear, and as we've moved to so much more of sort of automated online marketing that then is accessible, that's accessible through a web search to people anywhere, that getting back to this much more community kind of focused and community based way of marketing does mean kind of coming back to intentional efforts to sort of be on the ground again in the communities that you're trying to market to. And how does that work? And how do you, how do you sort of use these various forms of outreach, even electronic outreach, and leveraging the technology sort of platforms, but doing it really intentionally with this greater sort of community focus. And so I think we spoke about this a little bit the other time, right? If you have Office of Housing, if you're doing an affordable project and there is Office of Housing money, and these are sort of required obligations, but I think they do spread increasingly around the efforts that are being used now for this much more sort of directed and intentional marketing getting back to community.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think all of our projects are, because we're mission-based, we're always, the affirmative marketing for us is just part of our policy and practices, normal policy and practices. So this is just something that we do for most projects, depending on what type of project it is. Also, another thing too is, particularly if you're doing community focused marketing for a project, utilizing the community to help spread the word is always a great strategy. We had what we call community champions for this particular project, which are people who basically get behind the project from a mission standpoint, and can understand and resonate with what we're trying to accomplish, which is to provide more affordable home ownership opportunities to underserved communities. They then become a mouthpiece and really kind of like a walking advertisement, if you will, for the project. And I think out of the 10 homes that we have, we've sold 5 of them already. And 2 of those homes that have been sold already came from word of mouth referrals from existing folks who uh, supported the project, like what they were doing, maybe, wasn't able to move forward in it, but then also communicated the opportunity to folks and family and friends in their network who would be interested in it. So definitely, reach out to the network, your community, because they could also help spur the marketing and get the word out if you're doing, an affirmative marketing plan on your project.
And
Um,
that holds true for commercial properties as well, right? If you have if you're looking at buying or owning a commercial asset that has multiple spaces in it, right? That same sort of effort of intentional outreach, either to business owners that you know, or sort of if there's a sense of what kind of businesses you want to have aligned. We have done in a project that we opened in the International District, there was a real strong preference to be able to have businesses that were owned by members of, historical members of the ID community that were opening new businesses. Many of these were second generations or restaurant owners, or carrying on some of the businesses that had been in the building before it had actually changed. And so really, didn't do a go out to the broker and look across the city for people that wanted retail space. It was very focused, talking to community members, working with SCIPTA and other members of the community who were sort of just talking and word of mouth, finding out who was interested in opening a business. And
sure.
space.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
it travels across both residential and sort of commercial, if that's a need.
yeah, for sure. I think networking is powerful in this industry. Whatever professional you're working with or organization you're working with, having ties to the community, to the market, a strong network is really going to bodes well for your marketing efforts for sure. People reach out to me all the time because of past work that I've done, because word of mouth, all those types of things. And so, real estate is I like to call it a relationship business. And so just having relationships within the community, with professionals, with, other organization is always going to be helpful for your efforts. What message do you want to convey? So this is really important. This is where I think that having a knowledge around the community that you're working in and trying to market to is really going to be important, because particularly when you're working in communities of color, we all speak certain languages, and some things that are said in one community may mean something different in another community. How the narrative is constructed is going to be really important here. So I would, for example, with our affordable homeownership project, Forbiday, the message we were really trying to convey is affordable homeownership opportunities to communities of color. I'm very clear on that. It's part of an initiative. We're really taking an intentional effort with it, and we're also trying to create a community within the project. And so I have the flyer here. You may not be able to see it because I think I have this blur thing on, but anyway, sorry about that, guys. It says community and diversity as our tagline, and that's really what we wanted to say. It was just simple. We say a lot on the flyer, but simplicity, reasons, community, and diversity. That's the message. And then when they read about it, you can understand what it is. But really, when you're creating your marketing materials, whether you're creating flyers or your blog or your blurb, really spend a little bit of time on understanding what message you want to convey to the audience. And it always helps to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're trying to target. and ask yourself, what would you want to hear if you were selling it back to yourself? And so I just, encourage people to take some time with that, because, there's some sales skills involved here, and you really just want to make sure you convey something that's going to be attractive and speak to someone's needs and wants, and provide a solution. Point C, what is the marketing budget and how are funds allocated between resources? So this is a good question. It really kind of just depends on, what your marketing plan looks like. On our plan, we had like 10 different marketing strategies, which is a lot. Honestly, we were really, really wanting to make sure that we got the information out to the community. A lot of the strategies that we used were free. Well, free in terms of if you have like an existing social media account, it doesn't cost to put an ad on social media, but it will cost labor to have someone put an ad on social media. So kind of depending on, looking at your existing resources and then understanding what type of expenses are going to be associated with executing the marketing plan that you put in place is going to be important. I would also say when you kind of develop your plan and understand what marketing strategies you're going to use, spend some time thinking about what strategy you think is going to be most effective. Sometimes that's trial and error. A lot of times it's historical reference. What we found out through our marketing plan for this particular project was the most effective marketing strategy was the flyering. And so we put flyers up at certain places, restaurants, libraries, community centers. We handed them out at different various events. And then there's a cost for color copies. So I think our biggest cost for this particular marketing budget was the cost for color copies. And if you have a printer that can print them for free, you're doing really well. And then, so you can do a lot of marketing and not have a huge budget. Again, it depends on the project, the property, the asset. When you're getting into, multifamily 100-unit plus, office type assets, you're going to spend some money on design for sure. Making sure your materials are well crafted. You're probably going to use an ad agency, and that there's a cost associated with this. But if you can do something in house, your largest cost may be paying for labor to actually market it, and then cost of materials, flyers, and color copies and such. And again, I kind of spoke to point D, free versus paid. A lot of it you can do for free, but again, in my experience, the budget goes a lot to the cost of materials, the flyers, and making sure that it looks nice and pristine, and spend some time putting it together. Next slide. Thank you. So planning for marketing events. So this is, again, I kind of alluded to this on, when we talked about our plan that we put together for the Corvette Day project. We did a lot of events this summer. We did we were at a lot of things. We did the Homeside had a home ownership kind of resource center event. We got a table there and posted up our poster boards, and had a presence there, talked to folks who were interested in starting their home ownership journey. I think my favorite event that we did this summer was the United Way annual barbecue event with Doug Baldwin, who I like to tell people is a friend of mine because he is. And so that was really fun. I mean, that was really, really fun. It was at Ritt Memorial Stadium. We had, I think, any and every community-based organization was there, had a booth there. There was a lot of synergy between, the organizations and the folks that they were trying to reach, and the community, and getting resources and information. It was just, it was like a big family barbecue. It was just really, really nice. The kids came out and played. They had games and food, and it was great. But planning to attend those events is really important, because you can overlook the things that you'll need. Signage is going to be really important. Having a banner, a vinyl sign that can be posted up. having a canopy with a table, chairs, tablecloths, all those types of things. It's an event planning skill. And so if you have someone on your team who's really good with that, or you need to outsource that type of service, is something to think about that, because events could be small, medium to large, and depending on what type of event it is and how you're going to access it, you really want to take some time to plan for it. And then also keep in mind that if you plan to do events, you have to register as a vendor at a certain period of time. And you want to make sure you don't miss that registration deadline. We've missed a couple, and had we planned a little earlier than we did, we would not have missed it. So that's a point I wanted to point out. So groundbreaking, ribbon cutting, open house, property tours. So we're doing all of these things for our Corvée Day project. We did a groundbreaking ceremony that wasn't as big as we would like it to be. So in lieu of that, we're going to do a ribbon cutting ceremony and get the press there. If you have connections to local politicians, the news, King 5 has been a great supporter of all things community lately. Plan to have these people attend. Send out a, save the date or an email blast or message to these people about your event. Keep sending it out on a certain frequency that reminds people, but is not annoying, I guess. But it's really important because visibility is going to be everything in terms of being able to bring awareness to your project, or what you're marketing, and also to attract potential residents and or buyers to your property. Open houses and property tours, we've been doing a lot of that with interested buyers for the Corvée Day project. Once they kind of get past a certain point in their pre-qualification process, we're hosting tours on the site, which have really been fun and really been able to, people really like tours. People, when you talk to people about, the opportunity on the phone, it's one thing, you build rapport, you build a relationship, but when they actually see it, when they can envision themselves being a tenant or a resident or a, whatever there, it really helps in terms of your effectiveness to market the property well, because they're envisioning their business or themselves living there. And so definitely encourage open houses and property tours. Set a frequency that's doable. I'd say, every Saturday is great. And then also by request, if you have the capacity to do so. Website presence. This is going to be really important. At the very least, have your property advertised on your website, because when people hear about it, when they grab the flyer, when they find out about it on social media, first thing they're going to do is look you up on your website. And so always have your information updated, contact information, the details about the property available, whatever other information that they need. Photos are great. That was another thing too. In my early career, I took a lot of pictures. And so I've developed that skill, and it's a skill people think that they have because they have iPhones and cameras, but there really is some skill required to take a good picture. And so, put emphasis on that, because, people are looking at that kind of thing. If you could illustrate the opportunity well with the photo, good lighting, natural light, those are all things that are going to bode well for good marketing materials. Rental website, we kind of talked about that a little bit before. Realtor.com, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. I think those are the big ones now. LoopNet is another one where people go to find the latest information on home or asset availability, whatever they're looking for. And then also virtual tours. So virtual tours I really like virtual tours because a lot of times people are getting information that aren't local and they want to know about the property. And so one of the things that we used to do when we were leasing commercial spaces in, a lot of these ground floor mixed use buildings that have, apartments above and ground floor retail, we were doing virtual tours, which is basically it's a special camera and lens that you have to go in. And I don't do this. One of my employees does. He's really good at it. But you go in and you kind of take like this panoramic of the space. And then he goes and does his magic on whatever software, but he creates an actual virtual tour of the property that allows people who don't have the availability to tour the space readily to be able to see. And so it creates kind of this 3D visualization of the space, so people can actually kind of put themselves in the space and look around over and above what might be able to be showcased through a photo. So definitely I would encourage people to invest in a virtual tour. It really does help people envision themselves at the property. Next slide, please. Competition. Yes. So this is really important to know what else is being offered in the market. And to know how your offering kind of lines up with other opportunities. So we did that again for our Corporate A project. And then also I could talk about, with commercial leasing too, because we do quite a bit of that. You want to know what is being offered. So you want to do a kind of a comparable analysis on the competition out there. So what is the average, price per square foot? We're talking commercial now. Price per square foot for, a commercial space of, 500 or 600 square feet. Are they renting for, $35 a foot? Are they triple net leases? Are they gross leases? And just to kind of recap, we talked a little bit about it on day one, but triple net lease is a lease structure where you have a base rent, and then you have what's called triple net costs that are paid in addition to that base rent. And triple net costs include everything from, common area expenses, taxes, insurance that are wrapped up and allocated per square foot within a building if you operate and utilize common area spaces. And so we could talk more about that, but the point is to understand what the market rate is for a similar space. So you're not pricing above or below what the market is. And then also make sure that, if you're offering certain amenities that your, competition isn't, that might be something you want to mention in your narrative, your marketing materials to attract people who may put more value on certain things that your property is offering that others aren't. But I think for me in this section, the most important thing is to just know where you are relative to the landscape, and then to make sure you're pricing your project accordingly. Pricing is really important.
And Katisha, we have a question in the chat. Out of sheer curiosity, what are your thoughts on using AI for the purpose of leasing?
That's a good question, and I'm not an AI expert, and so I can't answer that. I don't know if if Damon was here, the guy who does a lot of our sales and marketing, he definitely could answer that question. But maybe I can ask and get back to you on that. But I'm not an AI expert yet.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something new. But yeah, if you have someone with expertise and you could ask him, and maybe we can just chat about that quickly, Thursday morning, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can share a funny story because I am far from an expert either, but we were doing a groundbreaking, so it's not quite in the specific context of leasing, but we were doing a groundbreaking event, and I thought, oh, well, maybe AI can help me write a press release and write an invitation to this event, and here are some facts of it, which I put into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT did spit something back out to me and then said, thank you so much. This sounds like a really exciting event. I'm very excited to come attend with you. I look forward to meeting you and seeing this wonderful building. And I thought, oh my God,
what have I done? Right.
Yeah. So I think there are aspects where obviously, like if you have I was using it, I was like, right, press releases have this really standardized sort of format and kind of set of elements to it. And rather than going and digging, one up and kind of making sure I was checking the boxes for the order and the things I do, like I'd use AI to help me out and do that. And and it did that. It spit it out, and it had sort of, oh, and here, here's a quote that it made up based on stuff that I had said. And but it is, I think it'd be interesting to hear what your team says, Katisha. But
Yeah.
I have saved that because it just cracked me up to all end because it was...
Well, guys, I didn't want to dive too much into it. I don't want to waste everyone's time. But one of the things that we started doing, I'm sorry, I'm Kente Van London, by the way. I work with Southeast Effective Development, or SEED, in Columbia City. But most of our properties are senior or affordable housing. And we just started doing this because of the turnover with staff and so forth. It's, of course, more costly to replace an employee after training them and so forth. So I said, why don't we take a look and, take a stab into AI? And what's crazy is, of course, it's available 24 hours a day, but it's become so precise that people actually think that they're talking to a real person. So they come on site to tour and they're requesting Trevor or Christian or someone. We're like, okay, I'm sorry, we don't have an employee by that name. And we have to think, oh yeah, that's AI. But the AI literally responds to all their emails 24 hours a day. And they're used, for the people that don't work traditional hours, they're actually reaching out to this device or whatever, this thing, and they're coming in expecting a tour, and the AI may respond and say, oh, hi, good morning, how are you? Well, don't you think it's a good idea for us to go ahead and calendar this right now? I remember you saying that you'd be, working overtime next Tuesday. It's just so intuitive. So I just thought I'd pick your brains on that to see if that's something that you guys would advocate, because this increased our occupancy dramatically.
That is so interesting. I'm so glad that you shared that aspect. I mean, we're starting to hear more and more about AI just in general, but now to think about it, in this particular space, I'm sure that there's something, definitely more to come on this topic.
And today, I think you bring up what is, even outside of AI, a really sort of important and useful point within the context of property management and the rollover of staffing. And I'm going to speak to staffing a little bit after, but the more that some of those processes can be sort of documented and written down for your organization as sort of standard, okay, somebody contacts you, what you're going to do next is try to make sure you can make an appointment with them, find out when they're available. Like those kind of pieces are effectively the data that the AI tool is now using on your end to help support that. But having those documented for your organization in a manner that somebody new coming in, right? If you end up with a change of staff in the middle of a lease up, and you have a temp coming in or a backup staff member coming in to try to help support that, having those sort of processes and steps really well documented and written down is a way to help preserve sort of the knowledge that you created around the systems that work with either specific populations you're reaching out to. Kind of, Kente, you're recognizing you've got people that you're leasing to that are working at all hours, and so how are you accommodating sort of a 24-hour information cycle? And those things really, really help. And so the ability to document, like have something you can hand to an individual that can be read is incredibly important and supportive, because especially if you're kind of in a lease, in any leasing, right? Leasing is filling the occupancy and getting the revenue from the financial standpoint for your property. It's really important to not have big gaps in your leasing and big periods where you aren't getting the revenue. Most of your models are going to be premised on kind of having revenue coming in at a point in time. And so if you lose a staff member, you can't sort of afford to spend 2 months training a staff member up again and then start the leasing process again. So,
and maybe some of those thoughts become part of the marketing plan that we were talking about last week as well.
Yeah, and excellent point. We've been doing just that. Basically what Kristen is saying, I'm sure everyone caught it already, but is creating infrastructural knowledge. And for us, Urban Black, we've been building an airplane while we've been flying it. And it's not the funnest thing to do, but the reason why we are doing that is because if you have that foundational infrastructure in terms of knowledge of, practices, policies, all those types of things, when someone new comes in or someone new goes out, you have this reference material, kind of this encyclopedia that you could hand or, use as training materials for new employees and so forth. And then also, we hold a whole lot of information in our heads. I really do a whole lot. And so a lot of times, documenting these things Like, I don't have to remember all the time what I'm supposed to do. Having a checklist of, do this, do this, do this, step by step is always helpful to be able to reference. And then also to make sure that you're covering all of your bases and not missing anything. And so we've, kind of how Damon and I have been working together, over the years, is while we're doing our deals, whether it's a leasing deal or sales deal, we're documenting the processes at the same time. So if you have the resource to do that, for sure. Again, on the AI question, I think that's also a really good thing to consider, particularly if you're managing, large multifamily buildings like Seed has and does. You're going to spend a lot of time, answering calls, inquiries, responding to people who inquire, via email or online or calls.
So it could be
And
broader.
it takes up a lot of time to do that. So I know, there's technology and software that, they have these robots, or for example, if you go to a website and that little chat box comes up and say, hi, I'm such and such, how may I help you or answer your question? I definitely think, depending on the assets you're managing, something like that, technology like that is going to be helpful and a time saver if you understand kind of what it's doing and how to control it so it doesn't get out of whack. Because I know it can do that too. So
And
good
Katisha,
question. Yeah.
just as a time check, we're running short on time, but we want to definitely
Okay, great.
finish this section because this is very important information that people, I think, can really get a lot of use out of. But maybe when we get to the next slides, we can combine a couple things.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, for sure. Thanks, Carolyn. Yeah. So just wrapping up competition, just know how you size up with competition. That's really important. And if you're working with a broker or something, that they can do a comparative market analysis to kind of give you a picture of the landscape. Next slide. Who has a responsibility for lease up? This is a really good question too. Will you utilize the services of real estate firms? Again, so it really kind of depends on the asset, what your marketing strategy is. If you're going to outsource it or do it in-house, it's a case-by-case basis. So in the interest of time, I just would say that depending on, look at your existing resources and then look at the task at hand, and then that'll help kind of inform your decision on being able to um, keep the services in-house or be able to outsource it. Do you have an experience in-house? Okay, here you go. Do you have experienced in-house staff who can handle the lease up? That's, again, another point to consider. Again, if you have the resources, make the consideration for that. But if you don't, then, outsource it and understand the costs associated with hiring a third-party firm. You may want to bring staff in from other properties who can assist during the first few months of lease up. Yeah, so we talked about this on day one. I did a contract with Catholic Housing Services, and one of the strategies that we had for lease up is that when we open a new building, for the first 30 days, we would bring in property managers from other buildings to kind of coordinate the pre-qualification process with interested parties. So it's kind of like an all hands on deck strategy. And definitely for the first, 30, 60, 90 days to operate in such a way where you could reallocate resources from other sites to, help with the lease up for a new building. Be sure your team has all the resources they need. Absolutely. Preparation is going to be key for a lease up. Make sure you have all your documents together, your screening criteria, your application, how you're processing your credit checks and fees, move in, move out policies. Pre-package that information up front because it's going to save a lot of time and stress for everyone through the process. Next slide. Setting clear monthly goals. This is important, and it's also important to understand the reality of those goals. What is the monthly goal in order to achieve lease up by date predicted? So this, again, should be informed by some market research. How the market is performing in terms of lease up will give you an idea, and a SMART goal to set for your leasing goals in your particular asset. How many units are you leasing over a certain period of time, and then also have those goals kind of identified in the beginning for sure, so your leasing team understands what they're aiming for. And then also, as a good manager, asset manager. So making sure that your team has everything that they need to be able to reach those goals. Is there additional compensation tied to meeting? Oh, that's a good question. That I would say is dependent on the project and the asset manager. Incentives are always good things for your team because it gives them, encouragement and motivation to be able to meet the goals. But then also, we can flip this and then say, when you're providing an opportunity, say for example, you're looking at a competitive landscape for a commercial space or a apartment that you're leasing. If you are maybe lacking in some things relative to your competition, you might want to think about, some incentives for, a 1-year lease. You can get like, I don't know, a month off, 1 month free or things like that. So if there's an opportunity to put some goals and bonuses to being able to lease a certain amount of units by a certain day, you can look at that on both sides as an incentive to and motivation to accomplish your marketing goals. Monitor lease up programs against those goals. Yeah, so that's just monitoring your record and performance in accordance with those goals to see if you're actually meeting them, and then also every month look at whatever potential adjustments might need to be made, both from a realistic standpoint, but then also if there's some areas of improvement. For properties slow to lease up, will concessions be offered? Okay, so I kind of just touched on this already. Again, understand your positioning in the market relative to your competition. So, for example, when we lease new construction, ground floor commercial space, I always talk to the landlord upfront about offering tenant improvement concessions. Because as a new business, it's already hard to, open a new business in a brick and mortar space, particularly if a landlord is offering what's called or described as a cold shell, which is basically a concrete space with no utilities or anything to the space. The cost to build out that space in accordance with what a business needs is going to be expensive. So in order to be competitive, as a landlord, consider offering tenant improvement allowance to potential business prospects. If so, what is the right timing? How does this impact residents, tenants who have already executed leases? Excuse me. That's a good question. I think it's just, in the interest of time, it really just is a matter of understanding how your space or how your offering sizes up with the competition in the market. Next slide, please. Be ready to be creative. Yes. This is, leasing and sales is one of the aspects of real estate that I like, probably more so than property management, because it allows you to be creative, and I think, look at it more as positive in terms of the real estate market. But yeah, I mean, when you put together a marketing plan, definitely be creative, be fun, think about things you wouldn't necessarily think about, because it could be that exact thing that really might be effective in terms of bringing awareness to your project, and then also giving you the ability to meet your goals. So yeah, be creative. Again, we in our marketing strategy for Corva Day, we had a whole lot of fun. We did a video that we put out. We're hosting like dinners with the first 5 home buyers that are coming into our project. So this is just where you really just want to make sure that you have the ability to drum up new creative ideas, because those could be very effective. So
well, you've shared a lot of great ideas. Thank you so much for that, for Katisha.
Oh, you're welcome. I try and go fast in the interest of time. I know I talk fast.
I know, but there's, it's important information. So, we'll make some adjustments. That's not a problem. But I think it's really important for people, to hear some ideas and things that have worked and been effective for you. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and experiences with the group. And we will now go to the next slide and move on to a short section.
Yeah, and I'll talk about staffing, and we can switch to the next one, Nicole. But the big picture too, just in this relationship between asset management and property management, is asset managers are, as we've talked about before, often hiring property management teams to do the day-to-day management on the property. And the property managers have the role for supervising on-site staff. And sometimes that staff is employed by a property management team and share their time across your property and other properties, and your property pays for that time. So as the asset manager, if you're not sort of doing the day-to-day management, you're still very cognizant of what is both sort of the role that's being fulfilled and the people that are on site on your properties, and what's the expense related to those staff members. But so when and it's critical kind of in trying to really understand, obviously, if you are doing the work yourself or you're managing that on-site property management, you have less flexibility in terms of having sort of a half-time person possibly, because if you don't have other properties that person can spend their other half of their time working on, you are figuring out how to often staff a little bit differently. Nicole, if you can switch to the next slide, but residential properties and office properties will tend to be staffed a little differently. There are, residential properties obviously have a more, sort of 24/7 presence. The maintenance work that is done to help tenants is, both helping the property as a whole, but also is sometimes supporting individual tenant needs in the rental spaces. In office properties, while that is not dissimilar, it's sort of sometimes that the work on the maintenance within the office suites is done by groups that the office tenants may hire themselves to come do that similar work more typically than you'd see in residential. And again, just sort of the frequency, we talked before about the frequency of leasing means that you aren't sort of thinking about people rolling in and out of units, residential units, as they may on a monthly basis. Office and commercial leases tend to be longer periods of time. So you are frequently not dealing with that same turnover of leasing. And sometimes in the office leasing market, folks will hire brokers, and so it is the broker and not sort of on-site staff doing the same kind of leasing because of the periodic nature of that, right? So you don't have a staff member as responsible for it, possibly, if you're trying to really outreach to a broader population than brokers who may be in the marketplace with their job, sort of understanding who's looking for space, maybe who you hire for that specific leasing task. Security has been a bigger conversation in recent years, unfortunately. And so that is typically hired from third party, not necessarily on the payroll staff of property management companies. So it is same thing in terms of commercial properties. What you see is sort of your staffing costs and then third-party contracting costs, which for residential properties, janitorial staff may be doing some work under sort of maintenance and janitorial, maintenance and cleaning in terms of carpet cleaning in common hallways or, a cleanup of the lobby area. But obviously, cleaning is not being done within individual units. In office or commercial properties, very frequently, cleaning is done within the office spaces on an overnight basis or periodic basis during the week, where trash is removed and spaces are swept down. And so you'll see that as a bigger line item, sometimes a third-party janitorial contract in a office leasing space. Next slide. I talked about this a little bit, but the hiring and supervising of staff comes to the property manager, and different asset managers have different opinions on how involved they want to be in the detailed hiring of who the property manager, who that on-site staff and who those people are. So you can be very involved and be part of those interviews and part of that selection if that is important. And we've talked about mission alignment several times in the course. And if that, having somebody that you are comfortable is in line with your mission and values as the face of your property, as that day-to-day manager, can be extraordinarily important. And for other groups, where it is sort of, they may be more separated, then they really may leave that staffing hiring decision to the property manager that they have engaged. We talked about, this was a question that came up the first day as well, a little bit, kind of the role of one office, one sort of, administrative manager and one maintenance staff person per 100 units, but there are lots of factors that get considered into that. I talked before, right? Like, do you have more maintenance needs because it's a property that covers more space and has more landscaping needs and more elements that just need to be maintained because you may have multiple buildings? Is it as compared to sort of like a single building with a single entrance and, an elevator that just goes to single hallways, and that's where you have 100 units in one building versus 100 units spread out across 5 or 6 buildings with more landscape space. And those things are what play into the decisions, the ultimate individual decisions, what's your turnover, what's your leasing like. And so again, from the asset management perspective, kind of what you are paying attention to or what you're really working through in the asset management lens is what are those stats? How do you get to the right mix for you of what you need from an expense standpoint, what you can afford at the property from an expense standpoint, aligned with meeting all the operational needs of the property, right? So sometimes if you have revenue constrained properties, while it would be great to have 2 people on site or 3 people on site, so you're covering hours from 7 in the morning until 10 at night with a staffed position, you may or may not be able to afford that within the property. So it's figuring out the balancing act of doing that and how you can leverage what works for your individual properties. I am going to turn it over then to Carolyn so she can speak some more about operations, but I want to just quickly see if there are any other questions related to staffing or related back to anything that we just talked about in the leasing before we move ahead.
No? Okay.
Okay.
But if you change your mind at any point, again, just let us know.
Jump
We're
in.
flexible. We're flexible. Nicole, we can go to the next slide. So now we're starting to think about operations, which is the point in time where your building is being used, it's starting to have needs, it's going to start aging over time, and we'll talk about some of those factors. But kind of harking back to some of the things we've talked about before, don't underestimate how important communication is. So now we want to make sure that you are really understanding, what your residents need and our tenants need. In a residential situation, I think we see, community meetings. We had a great example of how important this is with one of our properties that is located in Mississippi. We came out of the box. It was a rehab of a very old apartment building, very, very beautiful spaces, hardwood floors, just gorgeous. And right out of the gate, the property wasn't leasing up as quickly as it should. And there were some concerns about, with this being an affordable project, achieving qualified occupancy, which impacts the ability for the investor to take tax credits. So the general partner, who is a very smart person, but had decided that it was a property management issue. And so they changed property management companies. Then they changed property management company again. And then they changed again. And then they were back to the original property manager. So of course, time is marching down the path here. But the original property management company that eventually then was in place and still is in place decided that it would be a good idea to have a community meeting and just talk about why are all of these concessions that we're offering. We're offering an incentive to current residents to refer friends and family. None of that is working. And during that meeting, again, a very simple idea as to have this meeting, but it had never been done during that 2-year period. And they found out what was really wrong. The residents, it was a senior building. They wanted to have, some sort of a shuttle bus to help them get around it within the community. There also was a concern, the way that the property sort of like came down a little bit of a hill into the back of the building. And nobody, I think, imagined that this was going on, and no one said anything. But the property, when it was vacant, there were a lot of vagrants who were living in the building who still considered it to be, their home, so to speak. They were coming down the hillside, jumping on the top of a brick wall and coming into the central courtyard where they then had access into the hallways. So the residents were concerned about that, and they were afraid. And you would just think that someone would have brought that to someone's attention before them, but they didn't. But anyways, a fence was put up on that brick wall. They ended up getting a shuttle that they're sharing with a sister property that's close by, and occupancy went up immediately. And guess what? I mean, it's been several years now, and the property is still occupied at a very high level. So sometimes it's the simplest things that make the biggest difference, and being in communication as an asset manager with your property manager, and also making sure that there are meetings, whether they're formal or informal, happening with residents is very important. Usually the commercial tenant meetings do tend to be more one-on-one with specific needs for that particular company. You know, you also can do surveys. I don't see that happening too terribly often, but it's not a bad idea. And now there's, you know, all kinds of services out there that are free that you can use, such as SurveyMonkey, to send out a questionnaire if you wanted to do something like that. But again, communication, even when there are issues like the issue we were just talking about, it's just so important. And we've talked about stakeholders before, which can be owners, investors, other folks in the community that are invested in this property. So the idea is not to sort of draw within yourself if there are problems. It's really to open yourself up to think about the folks that you know, think about the players that are involved in the deal, and have that communication to try to figure out, you know, what's going on and what can be done. What are the best solutions? And the best solutions sometimes, as much as we think we're each so smart, it comes from talking to other people and getting ideas and sharing ideas. So again, don't isolate yourself. You know, a successful project, again, has that great communication, those relationships, which we've talked about. And I think from an asset management perspective, the next, you know, sort of adjectives that are on this slide, knowledge, curiosity, expertise, those are characteristics of a good asset manager. You're not going to be a great asset manager if you're not curious about things. You need to ask questions. You need to be, you know, I guess I'll use the word nosy, but you need to just be out there and just be asking questions. And even if things are going well, you still need to be curious, and you still need to always be looking to, you know, increase your level of knowledge, which again comes from courses like this, talking to your peers, and certainly over time expertise. Asset management is not a role that you go into for the first time and you are successful and know everything in the first month. It takes months and months, years and years, and you can be 10 to 15 to 20 years in this business, and you have to be open to the idea that there's always something new to learn or some new situation that's going to be a learning opportunity for you. Next slide, please. So again, we're talking about life cycle. So we spent a lot of time talking about, you know, ways to be successful, getting into the property and getting off to a good start. And we always need to really be thinking about that end game, which I know we talked about a little bit on Thursday. You know, what is that end game? Is the owner in this for a particular period of time? Is an affordable housing project with tax credits where, you know, you're in for 15 years and there's another plan for when the 15 years expires? What is happening? If it's commercial, did your owner come in to buy it on the low end, refurbish it, sell it on the high end, whatever that is? And so some of the ways that you can sort of kind of work your way through an aging property is when it seems like there are a lot of decisions to be made there. You can look around and see a lot of maintenance that needs to be done or capital needs. You can always pay a professional to have a capital needs assessment done. And as we mentioned before, that's going to lay out for you the various items in the building envelope and interior of the building and show you the life cycle of those components. So say a roof, and your roof should last 30 years, your roof is 25 years old. Okay, so in 5 years, we estimate, based upon our inspection as well, that you're going to need to do not just some roof repairs, but you're really going to need a replacement at that time. So it gives you a schedule of all of these critical components, where they are in the life cycle, how much longer they have, and an estimate based upon cost at that time, which we know costs have been going up like crazy, but what they think those items are going to cost. And you can look at that then, and you can start to make some decisions based upon the financial resources that the property and the owner have and also think about some things that maybe could be done later if it's not as critical. But this gives you sort of a roadmap to get to where you need to be and to wrap your brain around sort of the overall situation that's going on with the building. And that helps you to make decisions about whether to repair or replace something. So using the roof example, as we know, if there's a water leak, it leads to so many other issues. So if your CNA shows you, you've made a decision, okay, I'm going to replace the roof in 5 years, that's an example where if something happens between now and 5 years, you're going to either need to do some repairs or perhaps move up that time period to replace the roof. But there could be other, say HVAC equipment that, you talk to your HVAC contractor and they said, I can limp this along for another couple of years, or maybe they're going to say to you, you know what, I'm having trouble getting parts now. You really need to think about replacing this. So again, being sort of preemptive on some of this as finances allow and balancing those two things. Certainly if you start to see some decline in occupancy, you need to do what you did back at the beginning. Really, you need to do this all the way through the life cycle of the project. You really need to be aware of what the competition is in the market and not just what is in existence at that moment. But, you can go online, you can go to, meetings, you can find out like what's coming up next. So, you can look around and maybe there's no other building that's like yours right now, but what if there is something that's going to be on the market in 2 years? Like the sooner you know that, the better. You don't want to wait until they're getting ready to open their doors to realize that now you've got some serious competition and they may have amenities that you don't have. How is that going to impact maybe your rental rates, your occupancy? Maybe you need to spend some money to update certain areas so that the building is more appealing. And I would say that goes into play for both commercial and real estate, definitely. When is it time to rehab? Does the CNA get you there in terms of a thought process, or are you at a point maybe with affordable housing where you get to the end of the 15 years and you're going to resyndicate? So you're going to bring in a new investor, you're going to have new dollars that you can put into the project. So that may make you decide to put a repair, to push it down the road a little bit because hey, in 18 months, we're going to be putting a whole bunch of money into this building. We just need to get through right now. We're going to be fine. And also time to sell. That is, perhaps there could be a recommendation from the asset manager based upon pertinent information, including financial information, but ultimately it's up to the owner to make a decision, if it's time to sell. But as an asset manager, you want to be tied into, the owner to understand what's going on, because they may be thinking, I'm going to put this on the market in 6 months. If you don't know that, is it time to replace that roof? Is it time to replace that HVAC equipment? So again, communication. There could also be, the question, is it time to refinance? And certainly over the last, few years, there were some great opportunities to refinance. I would say at this point with rates where they are, it's very difficult to try to do that and to be successful. But having said that, understanding what your debt structure is on the property is very important, because there could be components of that debt stack that have an expiration or a due date that's coming up in the next year or two. And so, are you going to refinance everything and maybe take out some of those, if there are multiple loans, take out some of those underlying loans? Is it just a component? So even though it might not be a good time to think about, this is my main mortgage and I'm going to try to refinance to get a better rate, like that process, I think, is to the side at this point. But maybe it's time to refinance because you need to refinance because your loan is going to be due and you need to be not caught short. It takes some time to work these things through these days. Next slide, please. So we're going to start the financial management section a little bit here by starting out talking about the annual budget. And I'm sure that most of you are very involved in this process, and it's definitely going on right now. The underlying assets that we asset manage, our due date for our partners is December 1st, and we're already starting to get, some budgets in. Typically, we see folks starting to work on budgets ideally in August. Maybe September would be sort of on the later side if you really want to do a very thoughtful budget and be very careful about what's going in it. So the earlier you can start that process, the better off you are. And again, from an asset management perspective, you should always be thinking about, especially from the capital side, what am I looking at? And that can go back to the CNA. That can just go back to you walking the property and know, oh my goodness, like this carpeting, these corridors is a hot mess. And, we need to make sure that we budget for that next year. So whether you have a tickler file, you have something on your computer, something that you can put the information in early, the idea is that you don't want to start your budgeting process without already having some ideas of the things that need to be included. And it certainly isn't a task that is just for one person. It's not a property management task. It's not solely the asset management responsibility, but often we do see that the asset manager is the person who's bringing all the pieces together, but you need to know what the owner is thinking as well. So you're bringing together all these ideas. You're looking at the underwriting assumptions initially, because that is, if there's an investor, that's what they were believing, because that's what you told them or their development team told them they were going to get in terms of benefits. So you need to be aware of that. You also need to look at the prior calendar year, what those results were, and what's been going on year to date. So are you in an area where you're seeing, significant increases in real estate taxes? I think we can all say we're seeing scary increases in insurance. So just really having your finger on that pulse. And, if your insurance policy is not expiring until May of next year, you don't just take your premium for the current period and up it a little bit. Like, that really requires a conversation with your agent, because there could be some very continued very big surprises. So that's one thing I would like to highlight, is that insurance expense. So you start the process, you get everything on paper, you make sure that all of your debt can be covered. If there are, which I'm sure there are, if you have a lender reserve requirements, that you're putting aside the money that's required by either a state dollars being in, or maybe you have RD dollars in, HUD dollars, whatever your sources may be aware of those types of expenses that need to be included and are part of the calculations. And just know, like, you don't put it together in a vacuum. You don't do one version and you're done and you're washing your hands and going to the next. It is a very normal process. Keep that in mind. It's a process. And that's why starting early is very beneficial, because you need time to get it through all these channels. You may be working in a situation where you're working for a nonprofit and there's a board, and the board needs to approve the budget. But at the very least, some sort of ownership or upper management level is going to need to review and understand that budget and approve it, so that you can move forward and have something that really means something for the next year. If there are, again, performance goals, I'll just use that reserve request, I guess, or reserve set aside as another example of that. If the owner is saying, hey, I need a cash return of X dollars per year, they're looking for you to create a budget that is going to deliver that performance metric to them, that's very important to them. In addition to that, there are going to be certain debt covenants that need to be met, such as a debt service coverage ratio. So you can't make your budget, sort of even out or break even if there's an expectation from the owner of some sort of financial windfall for them. And or a loan is going to require something more than break even. They're going to require, 1.15 or 1.2 debt service coverage ratio, which means that you're generating more cash flow, more net operating income than what the debt is, so that if there is some sort of a blip, there's a little bit of a buffer. Again, verify the due dates of your stakeholders and your lenders. Lenders sometimes want to see budgets, not always, but if you have some, governmental funds in your project, chances are that they have their time frame and they want to see and to approve. And they may also have, some limitations of what certain expenses can be, or certain expectations, again, of what reserve deposits should be. We can go to the next slide. So this next slide is just a very simplistic, and I would say summarized budget example. So your budget is going to flow through just like a financial statement to some extent. So you're going to start at the top, which is the revenue portion of the budget. You need to be realistic about what your rental revenue is. You need to understand, are rent increases available? Are they practical? How does that tie to what else is in the market? All those other considerations we thought of. Sometimes I think when you're working through the budget, you probably will feel like your head is going to explode because you have to think about so many different things, and everyone is relying on this budget, and that it's an accurate, as with what you know at the time, it's an accurate representation. You have to be realistic, and even if you have very high occupancy, you have to assume that there's some level of vacancy loss. People do move, whether it's commercial or residential. There are going to be move outs. There's going to be some downtime in between a move out and a move in. And maybe if you're fortunate and you have a waiting list, that downtime is very short and really relates to just getting that unit rent ready again. You could have someone who moves out. I'm sure you've all experienced this, where it isn't just a rent ready type of experience. It really is almost like a mini rehab to get that unit or that space back to where it needs to be. So you're going to have some level of downtime, which results in vacancy loss at every property every year. And you could have other income. This example is laundry income, but you could have, other types of income as well. So just capture those, even if they're small dollars, I would just capture those as well. And again, when I say summarized, getting into the expenses, it's really the same. So you can see here, you've got some staffing and maintenance expenses. You have snow removal, utilities. This version, say utilities of 2,500, it's a collapsed version. It's a summarized version of the budget. And you're also going to have a more detailed version that gives you a level of detail. So it's going to separate out, sewer expenses from water expenses, from trash removal, from gas, from electric, et cetera, et cetera. Insurance is always a summarized line item. You've got your real estate taxes and then the management fees. So again, look at that management agreement, especially if it's a third party, is there an escalation in that agreement? And generally, if a management agreement is based upon rental revenue, if you've increased rental revenue, you're going to drop down into the expenses, and there's going to be an increase in management fees as well that goes along with that. But ultimately, you come down to your NOI number, which is your total income less your total expenses. That gives you your net operating income, your NOI, before you're paying any debt service. So that doesn't necessarily translate to cash flow because nearly every property does have some level of debt. Are there any questions up to this point? No? Okay. And again, if you think of other questions, we can always go back. Next slide, please. So this is a little more detailed version that I was talking about. If you look to the right at the schedule, you can see how it's breaking down, payroll benefits, office expenses into, greater detail. And this is the way that you can really drill down to expenses. And also, if your financial statements, when they're prepared, uses the same format, it's easy for you then in a periodic manner to get a direct comparison of actual to your budget. And sometimes if you're doing that comparison, you may have certain items that are seasonally based. So an example could be, snow removal. And if you're in an area that gets a tremendous amount of snow, then you might have heavier, expenses in January, February, but generally your budget is going to divide it out by the 12 months. And so there'll be a little bit of a catch up in the summer. If you have extra time and you want to get really fancy, you can do a budget that is detailed like this by month. And you can see that at the top of the screen there. Do you see that it shows January 2020 and then February 2020? I guess we should update that because we're a few years down the pike. But this is one that is trying to really put those dollars into the buckets on a monthly basis and then rolls up to give you that summary. But what you need to make sure of is your financial management team, how are they loading the budget information into the system? Oftentimes they're just going to take, the total at the end of this. So ultimately this is much longer, right? It would have the 12 months and a summary column, and it probably is also going to show your comparison to the pro forma, to the prior year. It's going to take the current year and say you're at the end of September, it's going to sort of do some proration so that you can see what you're expecting it to be for the current year, so that everybody can look at all those numbers and see if everything makes sense. But ultimately, the finance team often just will take that total summary and will divide it by 12. And that's why when you're looking at the financial and people are saying, hey, asset manager, like, why are we way over in this particular category? And the answer could be just there's a difference between how the expenses are recognized based upon some timing issues and maybe some seasonality versus the accounting team just doing 1/12 of the budget for each month. So you're not going to get as sort of an accurate comparison by them doing it that way. But trust me, it's very common. So if you have any control over it whatsoever, you could just talk to your friends in accounting and just make sure that you understand too up front how they're booking things versus what you're presenting to them to book. You're certainly going to make sure that you have listed capital expenses, because those are things that you're planning for in advance. Those are some of those things that are rolling around your head throughout the year that you want to make sure are taken care of. And you're always very hopeful that when it comes to budgeting time, that there is sufficient cash flow that you can actually, squeeze some of those items in and keep the building looking really well. All right, we can go to the next slide. So to understand reporting deadlines means that you're going to be set up really well to be successful. And again, that's internally and externally. So internally, the owner may say, I want all the financials. I want all of your reports, your management report, your operational report, the rent roll. I want everything on my desk by the 10th of the month following the end of each month or following the end of each quarter. Your lender may say, we need everything by the 15th of the month. Your investor probably is going to say the same thing. Or you may have, differences of internally needing something monthly, but externally, maybe you just need something quarterly. So again, just understanding the timing, what reports they're looking for so that you're not going back. Like, we have an issue very frequently that gets so frustrating and it really wastes time on both sides, where we need a rent roll that shows receivable balances because we're analyzing those receivable balances, and we'll often just get reports that are a rent roll for that month that show us what was billed for that month, which helps to some extent, but it doesn't get us really where we need to be. So again, that's time going back and coming back in with the information. Just putting a buffer in to review all the reports before releasing them out to your stakeholders. And this cash flow waterfall provision, in most instances, this is, well, in all instances, if there is a cash flow waterfall provision, it's going to be in your partnership agreement. But in most instances, in many instances, it doesn't even come into play until you get to a certain point in time, and often that's annual. So you may have, for an example, some soft debt on your property that you're not making any monthly payments on. It's cash flow contingent based upon cash flow available when the accountants do the analysis at the end of the year. And so this waterfall means there's a certain order in which cash can be distributed if in fact there is excess cash flow. And your owner might be saying, well, I want $100,000 a year, but if the owner isn't up high on that cash flow waterfall, maybe that debt source is up higher than the owner, then they may not get it, or they may only get a part of it. It really depends upon how that agreement is written. So understanding that provision is going to help you make sure that when you present your budget, that you've taken those things into consideration. And you wouldn't want to present a budget to an owner and have them think that their goal of, having cash in hand, 100 grand a year, is being achieved, when in reality, if you look at your debt structure and if you look at the cash flow waterfall, there's a soft lender out there who's going to grab half of it or 3/4 of it or whatever's been negotiated up front. So again, you don't want surprises. You want to be anticipating, and so that you're not having as many surprises. There's always going to be a surprise in asset management. You can't help it if there is, some weather event that does damage or something happens within the building. There are always things like that that are going to happen. But the things that you can control, you need to make sure that you are controlling and that you're understanding and looking at all the documentation. Next slide, please. So in some buildings, you could have, and this is going to be residential, program expenses versus operational expenses. So say you have a building that has a social service component, and you have someone coming in that is providing financial literacy services, or maybe you have someone coming in a senior building, a group that is providing some sort of healthcare services. That's all great. But when you're budgeting, you need to think about how those expenses are different from your regular operational expenses, And really, is there a source of income to cover those program related expenses? So you want to make sure that you're tracking any associated costs separately from your building operational expenses. And oftentimes you may have a funding source for those, and they may need copies of invoices, and maybe your accounting department takes care of those. But tracking it separately also helps you as an asset manager to know, like, oh, okay, we received a grant for $50,000 to provide medical services, but now when we aggregate our costs for providing those services, providing the space, providing the utilities, providing the staffing, that cost is really $60,000. So you have a $10,000 shortfall that needs to be paid from somewhere. So again, you have to think, is that an essential part of the component of the building services that you want to offer, and it's worth trying to cover that 10 grand out of operations? Or do you need to scale back that program in order to make sure that those two items are balanced out? So, the thought is that both of your costs need to be covered. You obviously have to cover your operational expenses. And if you have committed to providing some sort of a service, you need to make sure that that cost is covered as well, without one taking funds from the other. And you certainly don't want to end up with, as an example, deferred maintenance, because you're not realistic about what your property can afford to offer to its residents. So, what are the items that you could kind of cut back on if you were trying to cover a gap of any kind? Maintenance, unfortunately, is one of the first areas that people look, and you end up getting into a situation where you have deferred maintenance, and that can get very expensive over time. We had a property, actually it is in Seattle. I shouldn't say was, it is in Seattle. We're still an investor in this property. And it's a wonderful property. There are a number of different residential components. We're an investor in two of those particular areas. There are other investors there as well. Ultimately, there's a community center that is shared by all of the residents in the project. And so they are providing tremendous amount of services, aftercare, school programs, financial literacy classes, social workers are there to help family work through some issues. And the approach that the general partner had was to figure out what the budget is for those services, and then to sort of divide them up amongst all of the properties. But in reality, the way that the agreements were written is that, there was only a certain amount of cash that could be used from each of these individual projects to support the center. So they were trying to budget by budgeting from that center and pushing out those costs to be covered to the properties, without realizing it really was supposed to work the other way. The properties were supposed to work through their budget, make sure that all of their debt is covered, all of the things that the owner wants to see happen. And then what's left is what they could contribute. And that ultimately the community center would be managed and have programs that worked within that budget. And unfortunately, some years it means that some of those projects or some of those benefits need to be cut back a little bit, but that's the reality of the situation. So when it was actually a project that I was an asset manager for many years ago, and I was just like, it was a conversation. It was that communication. I'm like, why is this building not performing well when it should be? And it's performing to budget other than this one component. And we sort of broke it down. And then there was a realization, I think, on their end, which was kind of a surprise to me, that they didn't realize it, that they really weren't going about this budgeting process properly. And now they do. So they're in a much better place. Next screen, please. Okay, and so here is, an income statement that's showing program expenses. We talked about wanting to see them separately. So if you look in the top section of income, you can see that there's rental income, and there's the word net there, which means that, again, this is summarized and they've already taken vacancy loss out. But here's this grant for $50,000. And again, you want to know how you're doing against that grant. So the person who's tracking expenses, if we kind of drop our eyes toward nearly the bottom, you see that there's a breakout between the supportive services expenses versus the supportive service payroll. And because this is a wonderful world, that's not reality. Those two numbers balance exactly. But you certainly want to see those numbers being very close. And again, Maybe it's a situation where from an asset management perspective, from an ownership perspective, maybe the owner will put money in to cover if there's a shortfall. Maybe there is a decision to be made if there's excess cash flow that could be used to support a program. So those are all conversations that need to take place. Certainly the expenses in the middle portion are similar to what we saw in the first example, but ultimately you're coming down to that same NOI number of 26.5. You just have a plus and a minus that in this case happen to balance one another out. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Ellen,
Okay,
I think that gets us to disposition, right?
Yes, it does. And yes, it's disposition time. And I think that, Kristen, you're going to lead this section. We'll just talk about this for a little bit, and then we have some other points to address before we start our group breakouts.
Any questions on what Carolyn's been sharing on financial management? She's going to do an even deeper dive tomorrow. Not tomorrow, on Thursday, of the more of the financial reports that you look at as an asset manager and really thinking about that. But again, I just want to make sure everyone doing okay. All right, good. Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks. All right, disposition. If you are in a position that your property is no longer working for you, when we talked on last week, right? We've talked about what's the purpose for which you are choosing to own an asset. And sometimes, if that's an investment portfolio, it's going to be for a period of time that's then time to kind of gaining the what you want to realize out of that investment. If it's for your own use, then you may be in a position where you've grown so much that what you own doesn't work for your needs anymore and you need something bigger. If the location of where you're trying to provide your services has changed over time, it may be that you're trying to, you don't want to own this asset anymore and you're going to move to a different location and change. And so there are a host of reasons of why you might be selling a property, but the steps are sort of the same, and they tend to be fairly similar across the different asset types as well. So they aren't significantly different in terms of the steps that you're using if you are around a residential owner or a commercial owner or industrial owner, retail owner. First is letting people know that you have a property for sale. And Katisha has talked about, there are many of these elements of the network that you have in real estate that may be one of your first go-to spaces, especially if you feel like the real estate asset that you have has been part of the community that you are in, and you want to make sure that ownership's still held by that community. Then one of your first places to go may be that community itself, to let people know by word of mouth that you're going to be in position to no longer own that asset, but you want to transition it onto somebody else from the community. If your needs are not specific in that way, then you might be trying to market it broader. And you may be looking at trying to, find third-party assistance in that. How are you going to let sales agents, right? Sales and brokerage houses, their job is to sell property. So they spend day in and day out figuring out and understanding who's looking at the marketplace, who's been asking, and they're serving as that clearinghouse for people coming to them as a source of possible properties available. And so working through a brokerage house can be the space to find access to people that are looking, because you may not necessarily know the broad array of who is out in the marketplace looking. And so then you're able to deliver the asset that you have to the sort of other side of that pairing. And there are really big shops and there are small shops. There are folks that are working more locally and sort of in geographies that can be local, and there are groups that are working national. And so you really want to think about what is your asset and what are your goals and your missions of what you're trying to get out of selling your property. So again, I think particularly if you are working with a nonprofit and it's an asset, if sort of you're operating in this role as a director or a manager within a nonprofit setting where the asset's owned by that nonprofit, having really, really clear conversations with the board of your organization about what are the priorities in terms of that sale can be really necessary to help understand how to do this as effectively as you can. If somebody's trying to maximize mission versus maximize capital and cash, those can sometimes come into not necessarily conflict, but tension across each other. And so saying, your strategy may be different as well. We've seen that, there's seen that happen in the space in Seattle with the sale of affordable housing assets and a desire of an organization either to say sort of, I no longer, can use this affordable housing asset isn't sort of working for my portfolio and I need to sell it. And I need to sell it. It doesn't have a restriction that it stays affordable anymore, and I'm going to sell it. And sometimes that's in a space that says it's really important that we sell it to somebody that's going to keep it affordable. And in other cases, it's been the situation where the organization has said, I need to sell it for as much money as I can get, because really what I need is more cash to support the other assets that I have in my portfolio that are providing affordable housing that need capital because they've got the deferred maintenance like Carolyn was just talking about, or they've got another issue that needs a capital assessment, or we need some more subsidy to help support rents in these properties. And I have to take this asset that no longer is sort of working within our mission. Maybe it's because of a location, maybe it's because of a size, and have to sell it and have to try to sell it for the most money. And so I think that can be a really important conversation to make sure that you're having and thinking about in any situation of when you're going to sell, what are the priorities of the purpose for what you need. When you are selling, so just talked about sales and versus doing it yourself, you can absolutely also sell a property by word of mouth. There are standard, contracts of sale that exist through Realtors Association and through, there's a standard form. So that is work that can be done on your own. Or you can have real estate, if they're more significant, more complex transactions, depending on size and scale of the asset, then receiving assistance through legal counsel can also be really, really important to make sure that you're covering your bases in terms of what you're trying to sell, that the negotiation that you have is able to serve your needs. There are lots of different structures that can come into play. So one of the things is if you still need to use the asset for another year, you want to sell it because you need to transition that ownership. But if you're an owner occupier and you need to use it for another year, then part of your sales sort of strategy is, hey, I want to sell it, I want to transition ownership, but I want to lease it back, or I want to, stay in it and not have that sale go into place for a period of time. So have a contract on it, but not necessarily the termination of or closing of the asset and the actual asset transfer. If you have tenants and are, then you need to think also about if you're going to sell. Particularly, this comes into play in commercial properties. If you have a bunch of leases that are rolling in a near term of that horizon when you're talking about selling a property, then you need to think about, are buyers, given what the market looks like, are buyers going to be more comfortable buying something with a lot of vacancy because they have an opportunity then to re-tenant it in a different way? Or is that going to be really uncomfortable because it means obviously they're buying an asset that has less current cash flow and the possibility of vacancy? I'm certain, you've heard sort of what's going on in the office market right now. And, in the office environment, there's a lot of vacancy right now. So the idea of buying a building with a lot of office vacancy is taking on a challenge if you're buying a building. Now, if you can negotiate a low enough price, it could make sense and you're up for that, but you're competing in a marketplace that has lots of vacancy and not enough tenants right now grabbing that vacancy. So you could be up for having vacancy open for a long time. So you need to think a little bit about kind of what is the occupancy and what are the impacts of that on your sale and what are strategies that you think about. Contract terminations and just thinking about what is the term. Most property management contracts do have a provision within the property management agreement that sort of says if the property is sold, then there is a sort of corresponding termination of that property management agreement so that somebody who's buying it isn't necessarily inheriting a property management team that they may or may not want to continue working with. There are other contracts that may be, termination clauses. And we talked about janitorial contracts, security contracts. So just being aware of what those clauses are within existing contracts, and you often have to kind of notify buyers if you have contracts that aren't terminable or ones that buyers may want to carry on. Elevator repair and maintenance is sort of the bane of many people's existence sometimes, but if you've found somebody that's doing that really well and you've negotiated a really good contract with them at a really good price, hard to do because they sort of, you have these behemoth elevator companies, but if you have, that may be something that an owner would consider a future owner would consider super valuable to like continue to carry on and continue to sort of inherit with the new ownership of the property because of the relationship of the knowledge of pieces of equipment or maintenance. And then when you get to an actual sale, a couple of the things that you'll hear, just terms, sales often occur through escrow, through a title company. Title company is effectively ensuring for you and for lenders that you are buying something. I can't remember if we really talked about this at acquisition, but you're buying what you think you're buying, so that any other easements, rights to property that could exist on that title you're aware of, and that those are the only rights to property that might exist. Very common easements have to do with kind of utility easements that might go through. One of the utility companies might have a right to something under the sidewalk in front of your building, or a room at the side, and you want to know that they have a right to do that. God forbid you have a utility easement that runs underneath your building, and someday SCL comes and says, oh, I've decided I want to dig up that pipe, and we're going to move that electricity, and so I'm going to dig out you've got to give me all the space in your basement, and I'm going to dig a big hole underground. Can have significant issues. So your title company is insuring you against you knowing what those are and being aware of it, and also any liens, any sort of financial monetary obligations that are tied to your property. And so when you sell, those transactions often go through the title company and go through escrow. So money is held by the title company until all the sort of requisite obligations on each side of the transaction are sort of checked and confirmed, and the money has moved where money is supposed to move. The deeds or new recording or any covenants or obligations of new lenders have been recorded or released, right? If you are selling a property and there's a release of the obligation that was connected to your lender, the new buyer is going to want to make sure that they don't have an obligation to your old lender. They're going to want to make sure that they don't have an obligation, a use covenant that they weren't expecting to bring on. And then prorations are the sort of the balancing act of the most common one you see is real estate taxes, right? So you pay your real estate taxes in April, and that payment basically runs from April to October each year, but you sell a property in June, then you want your money back for what you've effectively paid from June to October already. And so the settlement statements and the transaction title sort of runs through and does the calculations to say, hey, you paid for, of the 180 days that this real estate tax payment covered, you were responsible for 90 of them, and the other owner is responsible for the new owner is responsible for the other 90. So you're going to get paid back or by them. Or if you're right if you're right before a period, often it will, often you'll also see that the real estate taxes have to be paid as part of that transaction. If you sell something on September 20th, usually the upcoming real estate taxes from the new owner, are paid within that transaction.
I think another example of that, Kristen, could be the rents too. So if a property is transferring on the 15th of the month, the original owner would have collected hopefully all of the rent for the month of November. So we'll see a proration as a credit to the buyer for the rents from the closing date, say 11/15 to 11/30.
Very good point, Carolyn. It actually runs across sort of almost any line in the expenses as well, is to sort of look at, again, if I've paid for security services for the entire month, if I've paid for anything that's running throughout the period of time, and a bill has been paid on one side or not on the other, that those prorations go through as a part of the calculation. Are there other questions about, this is sort of, there are a lot of things you can dig really deep into if somebody's thinking about selling a property, but we're just trying to give an overview kind of some of the pieces that come into play.
And I don't see anything in the chat. So why don't we move forward? We'll advance the slide. We're going to go into our breakouts, our discussion, which is going to be a little less than 20 minutes. Nicole is going to put us into 3 groups. So there will be a presenter in each group, one of the webinar presenters. Don't get nervous. We're not going to ask you to present anything. But we're going to go through these questions together, and we'll end that at 11:15. And after that, and if you finish sooner in your group, that's fine. But ultimately, we're going to take a break at 11:10 and come back at 11:20 and finish up the webinar. So with that, we'll have Nicole put us into our groups, and we will go through the questions.
So, yeah, welcome back, everyone. Sorry about that delay. I think I have the next couple slides talking about how and when we decide as representative of the property owner when to outsource asset and property management tasks. And I think, this is a decision and consideration that every owner will need to make at some point. And I like to think that this decision is relative based on a few things in this list. And we'll kind of just go through point by point and talk about it. So number one, yes, staff capacity, having an understanding of what your current existing resources are. And again, this is all really driven by, what asset you're making this decision for, but then also looking at internally what capacity, what resources, human resources you have available to be able to allocate this additional asset that you may be taking on relative to the type of asset that you're looking at and its requirements and needs. And so, for example, I keep referring to, current deals that I'm working on because that's kind of where my head is wrapped around. But for example, I'll just refer to that 10 unit homeownership product that we are working on now. This once the project is built, we're probably going to handle asset management in-house. And the reason being is because it's a smaller asset. It's only 10 units. It's condominium / townhome style. And this is an asset that we would be comfortable managing in-house because it doesn't, relative to like 100 unit multi-family project that we will have coming online in the next year and a half. This is something that we could manage in-house at the time because it will not require us to hire additional staff or human resources to be able to manage this particular asset. But again, this consideration needs to just be made, asset by asset, and just having a thorough understanding of what you have available now, and then what the needs are for both property management and asset management functions for the property. Number two, staff knowledge. This is, again, another important one. We kind of talked about this earlier when we were talking about AI, but, having just a realistic expectation of your existing staff, but then also considering what your existing staff has relative to their knowledge and historical information that they hold, and maybe having a strategy to create that foundational infrastructure of knowledge in the form of documented policies, practices, procedures to managing different assets. And so that if you have some turnover on your staff for these asset management and property management functions, that you can retain that knowledge both from a historical standpoint as well as a current standpoint of the knowledge relative to what is needed for this particular asset. So again, I always try to document everything so we can have that reference material available, but then also knowing that if you do have staff turnover, that the knowledge may go with the person if they go or come, and there's going to be some turnover costs relative to recapturing that knowledge that may be lost. But some preventative approaches to that is to be able to document it, as we talked about before. A distance from ownership office to the property manager. So this is a really good one too for consideration. The great thing about the asset management portfolio that we currently have, which is really kind of both at this time for us, because we're doing, single story, double story commercial buildings, some vacant land. We have our 10 unit, town home project, but then we're also preparing to grow our property management and asset management department to then assume these responsibilities for our 100 unit plus new construction projects that are going to be coming online in the next year or two. And so, anytime that these properties experience something, we have to be responsive and in close proximity to respond to the, emergency or whatever urgent matter is occurring at the property. So I live pretty close to all of the properties that we manage in Southeast Seattle. So I'm able to get to our properties, within 15-20 minutes if there was an emergency, like we had talked about on day one. One of our buildings experienced a flood in the basement, and so I was able to respond pretty quickly. But then also, depending on your staff makeup, definitely have your facilities and maintenance staff readily available to respond to any building issues on the site. And then if you have an asset where your structure is for the property manager to live on the property, that's a really good strategy to have to be able to be responsive to these types of things. Partner considerations, another one. Again, if you have, a relationship, a good, healthy business relationship with other organizations that may need the same thing or are utilizing, contractors or professional services firm to provide these services, have a conversation with them, see if there's a broker or management office or firm that is can be recommended, has done great work, those types of things. You can always get resources that are recommended that way as well. Either role or both may be outsourced. Again, it's kind of like you gotta look at case by case. Excuse the background noise. I did switch spaces, so I'm kind of in a more public space. But again, case by case, looking at existing capacity to be able to answer this question, and check with partner organizations that do the same thing you do and have the same considerations that need to be made, and check and see what they're doing and what considerations they have. It's a good way to gain additional information and brainstorm with other organizations and clients that are making the same decisions as you in an effort to not have to reinvent the wheel. So
okay, great. Thank you, Katisha. Let's move to the next slide then. We're getting ready to meet Paula Liu. Before I introduce Paula, I just wanted to check with you and make sure from a timing perspective, are you okay if we go until about 11:50 with our discussion?
11:50, you said, Carolyn?
Yes, does that work?
Yes, I would. I need a hard stop at 11:50, but I can do it.
Okay, great, thank you. So you just heard Paula's voice. Paula is one of our beloved coworkers here at Grow America. She's an asset manager, but responsible for a different aspect, sort of the asset management, than what we do in the affordable group. She's responsible for asset management, construction monitoring, financial and operational oversight of our West Coast portfolio. She is based in Seattle, and you can see some of her clients listed here. Prior to joining Grow America, Paula was a portfolio manager for Blanton Turner, which was a Seattle-based property management company, and she specialized in student housing. So I know she'll have some great examples for us of her experiences there. So I'm going to go back on camera. Paula, can you go on camera as well? And if you are, maybe.
Yes, I am. Okay, I am on camera.
There you are. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Paula. Why don't we start off, if you wouldn't mind, just telling us a little bit about yourself.
I joined NDC, Grow America, formerly known as NDC, in 2016. With my previous experience was, as Caroline said, property management, and I started from the bottom with Lorig Management, they were a developer, and then pursued on with Ben Turner. It was about a career of 13 years. And it was really interesting in 2016 when I applied for the position of asset manager with then NDC. I realized that I had been managing a lot of the assets that had been financed, developed, built by NDC for their partner, the University of Washington and Edmonds Community College. I was interested. I was ripe for change in 2016, and I decided to apply and seek that position with NDC because I wanted to find out how you can make projects come to fruition. Having spent most of my career, all of my career prior to that, in managing those assets and making them profitable and meeting the pro forma and the requirements, it was interesting to me to find out how you can get a project from the ground, from below the ground up. So, the question, I don't know if you know the matrix, but what is the matrix? That's what I was seeking. And I'm still seeking. I'm learning, but that's what keeps me passionate,
Keeps you going.
in this job day after day.
And Paula, I don't know if you were on the webinar when we were talking about sort of that natural curiosity that an asset manager needs to have, and the idea that you were just saying, which is it doesn't matter how long you're in the business, there's always something new to learn, something to keep you propelling forward.
Absolutely. I subscribe to that, and kudos to all of you for being interested in this course. It shows that you have a growth mindset that will propel you, that will sustain you when the times are rough. Kudos to Katisha, because since last year, I know she's been doing a lot more, but this is what keeps you going and keeps you young and smart.
That's right, smart. We don't need crossword puzzles. We have our jobs that keep us intellectually challenged, right? What do you do in your position with Grow America, formerly NDC, National Development Council? What do you do exactly in that asset management role?
I see, to summarize it, I think as I am a wrangler, I'm a representative for the owner. We have a portfolio. I have a portfolio of 12 projects, and our specialty as a nonprofit for this side, for the projects that I oversee, is public-private partnerships. So I don't know if you've heard about this. They've been known as P3s. Basically, it is when the public agencies, the government, decides to partner with a private partner to deliver a project that will be used for public services. So we call that social infrastructure. Typically, you will have heard of a lot of big projects where the private partner is a for-profit. Case in point, you have a justice center in LA, in Long Beach, LA, and with big mega partners that have the money and the means to take all the risk away from the government. We as a nonprofit, it's much more of a partnership that we seek with government, and we don't have the same financial means, but we are small, nimble, and savvy, and we tend to use tax-exempt bonds. So this tax-exempt bond deals are a lot more complicated than regular financing, and this calls for a lot of discussions with your partner. The partnership has to be stronger with your government partner, and then a lot more time spent reviewing, talking to the looking at the documents and working with the requirements, the IRS requirements. And once this is done, I think I spent a lot of time servicing the project before construction, during construction, post-construction, maintenance, and compliance with the IRS compliance most of the time. So yes, I oversee, if I were to put it, the main things that I do is customer service. I'm the hub for communication, anything that pertains to the building, People will send the questions to me, whether that be a property manager or what we call our client is a sponsor or the trustee, anything that has to do with the project and the hub, and I'll be able to field those questions if I can't answer them myself. The other part is managing operations. We tend to use third-party property managers. So this means that they need to be evaluated, the contracts needs to be renegotiated after the term. And I think what else do I spend my time? I think it's a lot of project management, whatever project pops up. You know, for instance, now I've been managing an insurance claim, a fairly big one for one of our clients, and it's been contentious. And it's been going on 2 years now, and we have lawyers involved and meetings, regular meetings with our sponsors. So that's the bulk of my work.
Okay, great. And I know you mentioned P3 and started talking about that a little more, but can you explain P3 in a little more detail?
P3 is PPP, public-private partnerships, and it is a situation where I explain an arrangement where a government entity could be, it could be a city, it could be a public university, where they decide to seek an alternative mode of delivery for a facility that they need. For example, the University of Washington was interested, there was a need for student housing in the 2000s, in the year 2000s, and they didn't have the means to build a new project. So they decided, they decided to start working with us, a nonprofit, a third party, a private, and to finance, we had the ability to finance the projects and to design it in collaboration with them. We would deliver it and manage it and actually run it and be responsible for the payment of the debt service. They didn't, this is student housing. Our approach to student housing was a little more risky, and where we took all the risks of operating, getting the cash flow, making sure that the debt payment was paid. And the appeal of this structure, this approach, is that the private partner will take most of the risk. We'll take most of the risk. I say most, and I'll explain why. During the riskiest time of the project, which is construction, we'll operate it for an agreed period of time. And once the project has proven itself to be viable, once things are all the kinks have been
running
worked
well.
out, then we usually reconvey. Our government partner decides to finance and pay off the debt, and then they take full ownership of the project. So we've done that, and our more typical deals are for office buildings, for example, Bothell City Hall. I don't know if there are people from here who live in Bothell. This is one of our P3 projects, and it's been running really well. Come year 10, based on the documents, they are authorized to refinance and pay off the debt and take it over.
It sounds like you are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and that's the benefit, it sounds like, to the municipalities that you're working with, that, like you said, we're taking on most of the risk, you're doing a lot of work, and they're making sure that everything is running well, and then it's time to turn it over, and you're on to sort of the next thing. What is in your job, obviously, is quite involved. There's a lot of variety in what you're doing, but what would you say is your most favorite part about what you do in your role as an asset manager?
I think it is learning new things. It is learning new things, and also the interaction, the people aspect of it. I work 100% from home, and there are days when I don't talk to anybody, but there's always, over the variety of the diversity of my portfolio, there's always new people to meet and to adapt. You have to adapt to their ways of communicating. So I think it is that growth mindset. There are some problems that you encounter that you had never encountered before. Oh my gosh, how many times have I said that in my work? Oh my gosh, it is the first time that I see, how do you do this? So you start searching, you start reaching out to your coworkers, you start Googling, and I think it is, working on a new problem, solving problems is really, a very, very rewarding part of my job.
What you're doing, good. Can you give us an overview of the type of buildings that you're responsible for? I think we have like some clients listed on your introduction screen, but in addition to the examples you already gave us, are there some other examples?
I think they're all there. We reconveyed the project that we had in Los Angeles back, I think in 2021. It was, most of these projects are office buildings, and I'm quite and we have a portfolio of biomedical facilities at South Lake Union that we built for the University of Washington, and it's occupied by the School of Medicine. Yeah, I think I will, I spent most of my time working with the university on the South Lake Union campus, because there are 4 projects there, and it's a big campus, but one of my smallest projects is the one that I'm most involved, like deeply involved in, and that's a small 184 bed student housing project in Edmonds, for Edmonds Community College.
Very good. And you talked throughout this series that we're presenting about, challenges and sort of rising to those challenges, sort of as a mini case study. Could you give us an example of a project that's been particularly challenging for you?
I think I always return back to Edmonds, our project there, because you probably talked about occupancy and the impact post-COVID, the challenges in office buildings. The same challenges exist in student housing with Edmonds Community College. The project that we built for Edmonds Community College was placed in service in 2009, and the financing was not great, it was not perfect. There were variable rate bonds. This was renegotiated, so a refinance after 5 years. We started seeing some not profit, but the cash flow improved.
Cash flow.
Yes, and then when depending on how the financing is structured, if it is a risky proposition, you will see that there is a requirement for a lot of reserve buckets, reserve accounts that are held by the trustee. This is the case for this small project where we had a lot of buckets to be filled. We call that a waterfall. First, you prioritize, your debt service reserve account, and then once you've reached this amount, you can flow down to one of the last reserve buckets was for capital repairs, which is always a great thing. But anyways, we had to refinance in 2020. And just as after the refinance, COVID hit, and occupancy tanked. And it was on top of that, the college had decided to sign a master lease with a competitor, another developer that they'd worked with before and leased units from before. They had decided to sign up with them for a 10-year lease. And that new project was not only new, but it was really close, in close proximity with our projects, which was older by now. So on top of that, not only do you have low occupancy because school has gone online, there's a decrease, there's no more international students that are traveling, you can't travel. Sure. On top of that, you have a competitor. True that the housing office at the college was our partner, but their interests were divided because we, Grand America, we were taking the full risk for paying the debt service for this project, and they were responsible for their master lease in the other project. So the occupancy, it took a lot of educating the people in leadership in a time when there was constant turnover. I have dealt with so many CFOs or, fill-ins for CFOs during those past years, just to reiterate the message that this project that we built was for them, that it was in their vested interest to make sure that they were placing, because they manage the placements, that they place as many students as possible in our project. So that what was the first challenge. And then the other challenge was to make sure that we could meet our obligations, our interest payments. We pay principal once a year. I was watching the reserves, the reserve account like a hawk, watching, and I knew, things started getting better in 21, slightly better, 22, slightly better. I was putting a lot of pressure by then on the university, on the president, on his team, saying, we gotta meet the debt service requirements. We're not even close. And more importantly, we have to pay the principal payment that's coming due. So I could see that the reserves will just cover the principal payment that was due. But, I decided to start telling the college that any payments that we were supposed to make to pay, they provided us, for example, with security services. They have their own security service and they would charge us. I told the college that we would defer those payments because we were prioritizing the debt service. And once we were able to keep, this even keeled and not touch the reserve, once the investors knew that we would make the principal payment for sure on July 1st, I requested that they waive the requirement that we meet the debt service coverage ratio, which we wouldn't have met. It was 1 to 1.2. We wouldn't have met this requirement.
Did you enter into like a formal forbearance agreement for that?
No. We were lucky that, the investors are very, very understanding, and, they've been keeping in touch with them. And at the bottom line, their approach to it is, we also need to pay our obligations. They saw that we were making the interest payments regularly, and they saw that we were really involved, that we were working a lot with the college. When the college agreed to, defer the payments that they were due, that was a good sign. So their approach, and we're very lucky that their approach is, let's make it work.
Yeah. And I think what I hear you saying too is, how important communication is, which was one of the topics that we've talked about, and just really being a planner. You weren't waiting until, June 20th to like have the light go on. There was this payment that's due. Like, you were cognizant of that all along the way, making adjustments along the way so that you could meet that goal. And that's, what asset management is really about. So, thank you so much for sharing that example, with the group. I think without you even realizing, you touched on so many of the topics that we have been discussing both last week, and earlier today. So we definitely appreciate that. And I'm going to take a guess that you like asset management a little bit more than you did property management. Is that correct?
Yes. I love property management because it was meeting people on steroids, because I would only work once, my office was supposedly closed because I had an open door policy. But yes, asset manager, I just even if not just for one reason, I have property managers working for me. So I do not have to accept that call that comes in at 2 a.m. most of the time.
Right,
Yeah.
the immediacy, certainly.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Paula while we still have her for a minute here? She'll be dropping off. So if you have any questions, just unmute yourself or put something in the chat. No, hearing none. Paula, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate your time. Hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. Enjoy the rest of the class. It's a great class. Bye.
Thanks so much, Paula. Take care. Thank you. Bye. Okay, great. We can advance to the next slide. Okay. And we'll hand this back over to Katisha.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, Paula's great. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left, and so let me go quickly and touch on these. And again, Carolyn and Kristen, feel free to add, jump in as you see fit. So how does your organization maintain its values if decided to hire a third party? I'm going to just give my quick opinion on this. I think that it is really about the relationship between the organization and the services firm that the organization hires to perform the asset and property management functions on their behalf. Relationships are everything. I think that having a good relationship between the two parties, ensuring that everyone is on the same page in terms of the ownership goals, making sure that there is a solid management plan in place and that everyone understands and can agree to and adhere to, as well as making sure that the third party is in, frequent communication with the owner about what's going on with the property, and working together really to drive solutions and meet goals and objectives. And so for me, that's been something that's worked in our experience. Our clients that we have now, we have had relationships with quite some time. And I think that for us, it's just been about effective communication and really teamwork, that we're all trying to accomplish the same goal. And so that's what's worked for me. I think that when the values are aligned, everybody's on the same page and has a similar belief in how to go about certain things, key issues, then the rest is really just about having effective management. But my quick opinion here is it's really relationship based, and being able to cultivate and foster a good relationship between the client and the owner is what will be key here.
One of the things, Katisha, I might layer in is that it's also important to understand, like sometimes your individual property manager may be aligned and fully aligned with the values, but sometimes other, sort of corporate policies that exist from a firm may not, may have places where they don't align. And so just a note to make sure that you're kind of checking at all levels of the organizations that you're interacting with, because it can be, I've seen property managers get put in a very difficult place where sort of they're aligning with your way of wanting to run a property and sort of very values align, but then there's a sort of corporate policy for wherever they work and they bump up against that in terms of actions they need to take or ways that they need to align. So it's just important to talk through at all levels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, just to reiterate one of the points here in the slide, that the property management company and or asset management company is really the face to the public on the owner's behalf. And so when you're selecting a firm, you want to make sure that that face front organization and or person, whether it's the property manager, asset manager, represents the owner well, and what the owner's mission is and what they believe in, and how that firm interacts with the community and or the tenants that they are serving. Our clients tend to be nonprofit organizations, private owners who actually care and want to take care of their tenants and so on and so forth. But, not every owner might think that way. They might think that, every asset, you want it to be viable and you want it to be stewarded and managed effectively to reduce costs and, increase revenues. But then also customer service is a big deal. In my opinion, and I think it can go a long way as it pertains to leasing, as well as property management and interfacing with the public and the community and your residents. And so you just want to make sure that you're selecting a firm that can demonstrate, all those different aspects that the owner deems as important, and just understand that it's about the relationship. So Sorry about that. That bell there. I'm doing a one of those info sessions that I talked about earlier in the leasing segment here actually right now for one of our projects. So I'm down here at John Muir Elementary School where I used to frequent a lot, trying to, share information with the teachers. So while I'm teaching this class. So again, choose someone who could represent the owner well within the community and the public, and adhere to the goals and objectives that everybody sets forth. So
Great. Thanks, Katisha. We can move to the next slide.
Q&A.
Q&A. So do we have any questions from anyone? Again, you can either put something in the chat box or you can just come off mute and ask your question. We're glad to answer any questions you might have. No?
I have one.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm
Dawn.
sorry. I have one small question. Would it seem appropriate if we have, after all of these classes are done, I think this Thursday, if we can do like a point of contact email resource sharing for all of us? Do you think that would be good or fair or reasonable?
Yeah, I think what we could do is just have everybody let us know if they're feeling if they feel comfortable with sharing their information, and we'll put a list together of everyone who feels that way, and we'll get it out. And certainly, at the very least, you would have the main, presenter contact information. But that's a great idea, Dawn. It's always good, as we said at the very beginning, like you want to be networking with fellow asset managers, because if you have a problem, trust me, someone else has had something similar and can try to help you. And you may have something that someone else needs to hear about. So that's a great idea. Thank you.
And I'm not sure if Melissa is sort of still on or listening, but Dawn, that's been sort of a question that we've encountered and pondered through the host of these, and so there may or may not be an opportunity to actually expand it as well over time with others that have participated in the asset management group, so that they're sort of both hearing some of the little maybe different tidbits of information if we've done it at a different point in time, but also other folks in community that are starting to grow their networks and grow their sort of trusted advisors as a way to ask questions of and reach out to.
Thank you.
Go to the next slide. So we've seen this slide several times now. So now we're recapping, what we got through today. We got all the way through our list, did great on timing. When we get together on Thursday, it'll be our last day together. We're going to talk about the outsourcing topic. We'll be talking about financial topics in a couple different separated segments on Thursday. Problem solving for some common issues. And we're also going to do a case study. So we'll spend, a decent amount of time going through that case study and just having everyone participate. So that'll be exciting to look forward to. And thank you again for your time today. We really do appreciate this opportunity to work with all of you and see what we can do to help you advance, your skill set and knowledge, and appreciate the interaction and questions. So if there are no other questions for today, we will end the webinar right on time, and we will see you Thursday morning at 9 o'clock.